Before we head to our guests, let's take a look at how the human cost of this latest war compares to others. In the 2008 war on Gaza, about 1,400 Palestinians and 13 Israelis died before a ceasefire was reached. In 2014, more than 2,000 Palestinians were killed in Gaza. 73 Israelis died, most of them members of the armed forces. And 2 years ago, another flare-up resulted in 250 Palestinians killed in Gaza. 13 people lost their lives inside Israel. Let's focus now on how this latest conflict between Hamas and Israel could pan out and whether it could be more prolonged and even more bitter than those that have come before. We've got three guests joining us to discuss this. We have Raphael Jerusalmy. He is a former Israeli intelligence officer and is in Tel Aviv. We have Marwan Bishara, who is Al Jazeera's senior political analyst in Paris, and Patrick Bury is a defence and security analyst. Before we head to our guests, though, we're going to cross to the United Nations, where the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations is speaking. Let's listen to what he has to say.
And began a barbaric pogrom of unparalleled magnitude. Ruthless terrorists gunned down innocent Israeli civilians in the streets, murdering anything that moved, anything. I'll show you just one example. Just look at this photo of bodies of women strewn in the street, in a bus stop. Innocents murdered in cold blood. These animal-like terrorists broke into homes, gathered entire families into rooms, and shot them point blank, as if they were stomping on insects. Grandparents and the elderly, among them Holocaust survivors who endured the Nazis, were violently dragged from their homes, this time by Hamas, and taken into Gaza. Can you get me the photo of the Holocaust survivor? Look at this grandmother being forced to hold a Hamas terrorist rifle as he takes a picture with her. This is inhumane. Inhumane. Mothers and their babies, as well as babies separated from their mothers, were brutally taken hostage. Just look at this video now. This mother is crying as she clutches her two precious babies before being put on a truck to Gaza. These are war crimes, blatant, documented war crimes. But tragically, the abominations don't end here. Hamas terrorists happened upon an outdoor party of hundreds of young Israelis celebrating the holiday weekend. These savages gunned down Jewish revelers just like Nazi death squads in the 1940s. Hundreds were butchered, their bodies mutilated and defiled. And those who survived were taken to Gaza. Listen to this young girl screaming as she is kidnapped, separated from her friend, not knowing what fate awaits her. Try to comprehend the magnitude of this situation. Try to digest the ruthless inhumanity. I have seen shocking footage, graphic images that will forever be seared in my brain. What we are witnessing are war crimes, blatant, barbaric war crimes, slaughtering civilians, abusing hostages, taking babies from their mothers. There are no words to describe such savagery. I don't want to imagine what is happening right now to all of those innocent Israeli civilians being held captive in Gaza, the horrors they are enduring.
Okay, that was the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations ahead of a Security Council meeting. Certainly some strong words of condemnation coming from him. I want to bring in Al Jazeera's senior political analyst, Marwan Bishara, to give us his reaction to what was said by the ambassador. Marwan?
Well, it's to be expected, of course. There's been a tragedy of sort for Israel. It was shocked to the core by the attack yesterday by Hamas fighters. And I think they're immediately getting engaged in public relations campaign in order to demonize Hamas and the Palestinians. But alas, in this very particular region, for every picture or image, dramatic, bloody, and sad as it may be, the Palestinians, of course, will produce 1,000 other images and pictures of Palestinians dead and injured and kidnapped and so on and so forth by Israeli soldiers and Israeli settlers. It is quite unfortunate that instead of learning the lessons of history in this very particular case, the Israelis are immediately resorting to more of the same hasbara, to more of the same propaganda, instead of really looking inward and to see what are the root causes of this issue and what drives Hamas fighters to carry such an attack. Why would they terrorize the population of southern Israel? What is the nature of occupation? What is the nature of oppression that produces this kind of resistance? Because as we know, from 300 years and more of history of such asymmetrical conflicts, when guerrilla warfare takes place against occupiers or imperialists or colonialists, it's always a certain dialectic between repression and resistance. And resistance, as it were, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The resistance is very much a mirror image of the occupation, except the resistance seems to be, unfortunately, I would put it that way, retail violence, while occupation is a wholesale violence against the people.
Marwan, I appreciate your insights. I want to move away from the historical context now and look at what's currently happening militarily. And let's return to our guests, bring in Raphael Jerusalmy, who is a former Israeli intelligence officer in Tel Aviv, and Patrick Bury, who is a defence and security analyst and former British Army captain. I'm going to start with you, though, Raphael. We've heard tonight the most recent developments coming out of Israel and from the Knesset is an official declaration of war. What, if any, impact will that have on the conflict on the ground?
It will give more power to the government and to the army to take extreme measures, to act fast, to have quick decisions, to strike very hard. I must say that what happened, and I'm happy to have had an example of somebody just before me on the screen to justify raping and killing women and children, which is a very good thing, because this killing of children, this raping, has led Israel to eventually understand who we are dealing with. We are dealing with a faction, a terrorist faction, that we hoped until a few days ago that we could improve the way of life of the people of Gaza. I want to say very quickly and very from the beginning, I want to dissociate the Palestinian people from those people who are attacking Israel in such a way. The Palestinian people, we have no hatred for them, and they have no hatred for us. They are being, as we spoke of public
Raphael,
relations.
I'm just going to interrupt you there. I'm sorry, because you've just made quite a strong allegation in terms of the raping of women. I think we do need to clarify that. As far as I'm aware, we haven't actually heard any confirmation that that is what's been happening on the ground. And as we've been reporting, there have been hundreds of civilian deaths on either side. Perhaps before we go to our other guest, Marwan, I'll just get you to respond to Raphael if we can.
Look, just in a very, sober way, if one can be sober in such tragic times, we know that Hamas held one very particular captive, and that was Gilad Shalit, an Israeli soldier, for a number of years. And then he was released in a prisoner exchange. And what we know from Gilad Shalit himself, after he was released from captivity by Hamas in Gaza, is that basically nothing much happened to him. I mean, in as much as there is anger, frustration, and pent-up violence in Gaza, in the end of the day, the Israeli soldiers was held, was released, and in as far as I could tell from interviews with him, he was remained as he was before he was, got him to be captive by Hamas.
Okay, I want to move on. I want to move on now. Okay, sorry, Raphael, I'll let you explain. I'll let you respond.
I will just ask a question. I do not want to go into this sterile debate of who is the most naughty, the Jews or the Palestinians in this story, and who has perpetrated the most atrocities. This is a sterile debate.
Yes, I agree.
My question again is very simple. In what way do you think that this operation of killing civilians yesterday will improve the quality of life of the people of Gaza? In what way do you think this will advance the Palestinian cause? Do you really believe that by doing this, you are going to liberate Palestine and make Palestinian people happy?
Raphael,
you have been putting them into
the one that
misery
asks, excuse
for
me, sir,
years.
I'm the one that's going to ask the questions here, as much as I appreciate your opinions. And I want to focus, the whole point of this panel is to focus on the military situation at the moment. I think that we can go back and forward about this historical conflict for days and weeks, but what I want to focus on is the military conflict, and that's why I want to bring in Patrick. We're hearing that the White House, particularly Joe Biden, has spoken to the Israeli Prime Minister, and as well Netanyahu has spoken to the White House has spoken to Netanyahu, and he has said that additional assistance for Israeli Defence Forces is now on its way to Israel. What do you think that looks like?
Good evening. I think the first thing would be intelligence support. That's the kind of assets you can move quickly to get over the areas in question and try to give Israel some more plug-in from the US intelligence side. That's usually the kind of thing. Potentially with some high-tech weapons, the Israelis obviously have a very capable arsenal themselves, so it's probably less of a requirement than just getting some extra intel support in the first instance so they can understand the picture, because they've been taken by surprise. I think, as Raphael said, there's an intent thing here, which has been a failure. They've misunderstood Hamas's intentions. And then at the operational level, clearly they've been taken badly by surprise, even though, as history tells us, this holiday season, you should be more aware, more cautious than usual. And there'll obviously be serious political repercussions of this, what looks like also an intelligence, potentially a policy failure as well.
Yes, just on that point, and I'll just stick with you for just a moment. From a military perspective, how hard will it be for Hamas to maintain this level of conflict now that we're hearing some of these superpowers are going to get involved?
Well, I don't know. The superpowers getting involved might be an overstatement. This would be intelligence support. It's no boots on the ground or anything like that. It's kind of the thing you do with allies and partners, of which Israel is to the United States. So, the most interesting thing about this from a military perspective, obviously, is the way that Hamas were able to overcome in a coordinated attack at multiple targets, 5 or 6, synchronized in time, using at first drones against. You've got to remember the wall is basically a bit of a network. It's not just a wall that they've broken through. They've managed to disable the sensors using drones, also knocked out tanks using drones. We've seen that in the Ukraine war. They've used the barrages of, it looks like Iranian-supplied missiles to get around it through Iron Dome, overwhelm it, and then at the same time using either gliders or just attack squads, essentially cut through the wire and get into some of the even army bases. I think it raises questions as to Israel's military capability, which isn't a good look for Israel, since it likes to be seen as the strong man and incredibly capable in that region. And potentially there's, speaking to some experts, there's a question mark, have they been too sort of raid and counter-terrorism focused and maybe not expecting this? So I think there's a lot of repercussions to come out of this for sure.
Raphael, what's your response to what Patrick said? As a former intelligence officer, how do you see the US support playing out? Will that come in the form of intelligence?
It will come in the form of intelligence as usual, but it also comes into logistic support. We need more and more ammunition from the Iron Dome system. We had between 2,000 and 3,000 rockets and missiles being shot from Gaza into Israel. So we used a lot of our ammunition, and usually the United States help us to have more weaponry, more munitions. I don't think we do need the American army. I'm sure that Joe Biden doesn't want to have American troops, boots on the ground, and not even the fleet in the Mediterranean. It wouldn't help in any way, because it gives a lot of superiority to the Hamas is that Gaza is a very densely populated area. And it's very difficult to operate there. It doesn't matter if you bring the whole American army. That's not going to change anything, because we're talking about urban guerrilla warfare, which is like from house to house, from street to street, in very narrow, most of the time, streets that, of course, the inhabitants of Gaza know very well, and that a soldier coming in from abroad doesn't know. It gives a tremendous advantage. And it always has been guerrilla warfare as against the regular army. It's a very complicated, intricate situation, especially that in Gaza, because of the density of the population and because the leaders of the Hamas are hiding behind schools and hospitals, makes it extremely difficult to operate. It has to be very surgical and very fast. And we have here a very big problem. That's why the IDF will avoid, as long as possible, to enter with ground forces. There will be, as much as possible, a pounding from the artillery and the Air Force. And that's why today we have asked citizens of Gaza to leave their homes, to go to a beach, to go to a field, but to evacuate their homes, because we are now destroying everything that is a command center or a communication center of the Hamas, and these are usually in buildings inside the city.
Okay, I'll just let Marwan respond, because we're talking about the military might of Israel versus Hamas. How has Hamas managed to acquire and amass this huge amount of weaponry, especially rockets, even as it's under siege and given the sanctions?
Well, I'm sure they're not going to give away their secrets, right? But let's put it this way, Emily. As it were, need is the mother of all inventions. And because of the dissymmetry of forces, of power, between Israel and the Palestinian factions, the Palestinian factions had to resort to new creative way in order to confront Israel, in order to defend themselves. And these means tend to be the kind of things that we've seen, the way they could bypass the Israeli wall of security by air or by sea, or digging these countless tunnels, right, as they did in the past. So clearly they have gone from strategy to stratagem. They have tried to devise new, intelligent, creative ways. Some of them are, of course, controversial. But be that as it may, they needed to do that, because in asymmetrical warfare, the weaker party cannot face the stronger party face to face. The 18th century warfare is over. In this kind of asymmetrical warfare, as Israel pounds Gaza by rockets and by planes, and that's certainly random, not exactly targeted, because you could never target anything by, launching these sorts of rockets against a populated area. But to say to people to go to the beaches and to the fields, when just yesterday we've heard that the Israelis were in fact bombing the fields. So in Gaza, a prison of 2-3 million people, there is nowhere to go. The only way they can do, in fact, is only swim for it. And you can imagine how ridiculous that sounds.
OK, I want to move on to another issue. Patrick, I'll address this question to you. We know that there are an unknown number of Israeli prisoners that are being held by Hamas. Hamas has used prisoners before like this in the past and managed to gain a lot in exchange. So how do you see them using these prisoners going forward, particularly within the negotiations?
So just to actually pick up on one thing Marwan said, it's all correct in terms of, being creative, innovative, adaptive. They're also Hamas are getting a lot of help from the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, and that point needs to be made. It's very clear. So, and that would be training and weapons support. As to the hostages, the hostages essentially are there as an insurance policy to try to slow down or deter a ground incursion, and also the airstrikes to make it more complex in terms of where they're going to hit. They want to make sure, the IDF will want to try to make sure that they're not going to bomb their own civilians who've been held hostage. So it's essentially about a deterrence and about a slowing down of the ground offensive, if it can work in that sense. And finally, then, as you correctly identified, as a bargaining chip in negotiations. But, we're not in the negotiations phase here at all. And the priority, of course, will be for those, if that's what they're to be used as ultimately as a bargaining chip, well, then the Palestinians and the Hamas who's taken them essentially have to ensure their safety, don't they, so that they're not killed. So we shall see.
We've already seen in the past hour or two heavy strikes, heavy bombardment on Gaza City. Raphael, do you think that we will see this conflict turning to the ground? Do you think that the military will turn to offensive operations going forward? And what form will that take? Will that be boots on the ground entering the border?
Yes, it has to be. There is no choice to finish the job. Boots on the ground, because this time it is true we have this problem of the hostages that we want to spare. On the other hand, these hostages are the very last hostages the Hamas will ever put their hands on, meaning the violence of this attack, this surprise attack, the cruelty of this surprise attack have achieved two things: unity in Israel. The Israelis were divided until that attack. It was political chaos. It was a social controversy. Everybody is now united from the top to the bottom, and everybody is united in one thing: to finish once and for all the Hamas. The Hamas yesterday, by performing this attack, has signed its own death warrant. It shall be destroyed. It is the last time they will have hostages. They might be sacrificed or they might be saved, but the priority is to finish once and for all. And because of that, there will be boots on the ground. The advice that is given by most security person, including myself, is to send these boots on the ground as late as possible and to destroy from the air and from the artillery as much as possible, because as was rightly pointed, once the Israeli troops enter Gaza, they will suffer a lot of casualties.
All right, Raphael, Marwan, we only have a few minutes left of the program. I guess I wanted to get your perspective as we talk about military and the politics. We're ultimately talking about people, and we've had hundreds of casualties on both the Israeli and on the Gaza side. Just a final thought from you.
Look, it's horrible, right? The casualties, civilians on either side, on any side. But I think this very particular conflict, we need to go beyond the casualties, because that's not what the leaders really think about, believe it or not. They're not as humane as the rest of us. I think here, what we have is a major blow to Israel's strategy, policy, psychology, and so on and so forth. And while the Israelis now are united around Netanyahu because of the tragedy, I think soon enough, Netanyahu is going to be deposed, because all these failures happened under his watch. And why did this all happen? And just very briefly, let's summarize 4,000 years of history. The ancient Greece understood it better than anyone else. It's called It's called hubris, arrogance. Arrogance breeds blindness and stupidity. The Israelis were arrogant in 73 and they were dealt a blow. They were arrogant in the 1980s and they were dealt a blow by the Lebanese resistance. And they're again been arrogant towards the Palestinians and they were dealt a blow yesterday. It's tragic, but that's just what happened when hubris is the order of the day for Israel.
Now, there's certainly a lengthy historical context that we could spend a long time taking into account. We really appreciate all of our guests' thoughts. Unfortunately, we do have to leave it there, but we will continue our rolling coverage of the war between Israel and Gaza. And I'll just recap, there are more than 700 Israeli casualties and almost 400 Palestinians. Stay with us. We'll have more news in just a moment.